Kind of. All right, it's not really morning anymore, but happy Sabbath anyway. It's good to be in springtime. I don't know about you, but man, it's easily my favorite time of year. When the sun starts popping out again and the asparagus starts coming up. Yeah, it's very good. All right, so we've been journeying through Hebrews chapter 11, just kind of digging back at some of our roots of our faith. Really, I mean, I know this is in Hebrews chapter 11 is in the New Testament, but really it's a story about the Old Testament, right? It's actually pointing back to our roots, to our beginnings, and really the focus is actually on Genesis and a little bit into Exodus and a little bit even beyond that at the very end. But today we're still going to be focusing on the Genesis aspect of it, and our text is Hebrews 11, 17 through 19 this morning. So if you're not familiar with the story of Abraham, or if you weren't here 2 weeks ago, we'll just do a kind of an overview of this man's life. This is what we're talking about today. Kind of a crazy thing, right? Yeah. Crazy thing that happens here in the Old Testament. And yet he's called the father of our faith. Now, okay, so if you remember, at least if you were here, Abram is from the land of Ur, right? And Babylon is split apart, and he actually moves down there to Ur, and he's kind of a remnant of Babylonia. And God asks him to get up and leave there and come over to this land of Canaan. In other words, to leave his past behind, to leave Canaan and the pagan lifestyle behind him. And unfortunately, he kind of brings some of that lifestyle with him. Isn't super faithful to God even when he comes here, and there's a promised land that God has commanded him to come to, and there's a famine pretty much right when he gets there, and that's like kind of weird in the first place why God would send him there. But he goes to Egypt and lies or tells a half-truth about his sister wife, right? He fails to mention that they're married, just tells him that he's a sister because he's afraid for his own life and is not really faithful to the covenant he's already made with God, by the way. Okay? And then he's not really, but he gets out of it. Plagues come upon Egypt actually because of this, and there's trouble, and Pharaoh sends him away with a great multitude of people, among them being a lady by the name of Hagar, who his wife convinces him to sleep with, even though God has already promised something through her. Okay? He's like, well, we're not getting what we were promised, so take it on your own terms and sleep with Hagar. And he does so. And yeah, we talked a little bit about circumcision and that fun aspect of how that's actually a promise from God, but it's also a reminder of how Abraham failed but a promise through this. Anyway, God ends up blessing him more through this thing, and then Sarah actually conceives even though she's like 100. Right? Okay, she actually conceives. And Greg Boyd, who has helped me significantly with this, in his book Cross Vision, he says this. He says, if Abraham and Sarah quickly conceived their promised son during their childbearing years and natural means, the lingering pagan aspects of their view of God would have gone unchallenged. Okay? So in other words, they had these views that they've gotten from all these pagan gods, and they were thought, oh, if we do things in a certain way, Yahweh is just like these other gods. And God is actually breaking them of that by waiting till they're like 100 to have a kid. Okay? All right, so a brief summary is God asks him to get up and go. He does. He's unfaithful, but still kind of trusts the Lord, and God ends up fulfilling the promise. And now we are going to be focusing on Genesis chapter 22, and this is where God is actually not just asking him to abandon his past, he's actually asking him to abandon his future. Okay? We can all get on board with abandoning a bad past, right? But abandoning the promised future, and God asking you to do that, it seems kind of crazy. It seems counterintuitive and weird. Okay? All right, I'm hoping today that a familiar story makes a little bit more sense to us and helps us understand a little bit more about God. here we are in Hebrews chapter 11. Keep in Genesis, actually, but we'll just show this now. But we're going to be in Genesis chapter 22, the first 12 or 13 verses. Okay, it says this. It says, by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able to even raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Okay, Isaac, anybody know how old Isaac is? We usually think of him as a little boy, right? He's actually probably in his late teens, early 20s by this time. Okay? He hasn't had any children, which was the promise, right? Your offspring are actually going to come through Sarah's firstborn child. In fact, it calls it his only son. It just means his unique son, because SJ is not his only son. He has, right, through Hagar. It's not even his first son. But this is this only son, this unique son, it's actually the same adjective ascribed to Jesus, by the way. Okay, this is what Bart Ehrman, theologian and scholar, says about this. He says, the God who had promised Abraham a son now wants him to destroy that son. And the God who commands his people not to murder has now ordered the father of the Jews to sacrifice his own child. It seems really, really backwards, doesn't it? Parents, could you imagine this? Like, I'm not a parent, and I can't even fathom this. God asking you to go kill your firstborn child. Would you do it? No. No. Just blatantly. What if God came to you directly and told you to go do this, and you were sure it was him? How could you do it? How could you possibly do it? Okay, now, let alone a child that God has already promised you. Okay, so there's two general explanations for this that we hear over and over again to kind of appease our discomfort with this story. And neither of them satisfy me. Okay, this is our general things, is that God was testing Abraham in the moment, which is true, right? It says, actually, previously. And that it was pointing to the future sacrifice of Jesus. Is that true? Yeah, both of those are true, but they're very, very unsatisfactory to me for how disturbing this story is. Do we have to do this? Do we have to go this far with this to be able to make those points? Because this is terrifying. Okay, it's terrifying on a couple levels because multiple times God prohibits and even condemns child sacrifice and murder, right? Leviticus chapter 18, Leviticus chapter 20. Actually, throughout the entire Old Testament, God is condemning child sacrifice. And yet, this is one of the first things he does is command Abraham to. And we say that the Bible doesn't contradict itself. This is one of the claims people make, right? It's contradicting itself. How do we explain this, guys? You guys, seriously, how do we explain this?
To test the faithfulness.
I'm not satisfied with that. I understand, and I actually agree with you, but that's not a satisfactory answer to me. To test faith, to kill your own child? This is not God's character, is it? Okay. It's not satisfactory because it's commanded other places that we don't do this. And then this. Okay, you remember this story? Where Abram is right before Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And what does Abram do when God's like, oh, I'm going to destroy everybody? What does Abram do? Remember? What does he do?
If you could say one person.
Yeah, he's sitting there, God, please, if there's 100 people in there, please don't kill all these people, right? Or if there's 100 good men, he's like, okay, if there's 100 good men. If there's 50, he's like, okay, if there's 50. If there's 10, 5, what? Just if there's just one, gets him down to one, and he's like, I won't do it just for the sake of one. So he's not okay with God just destroying people. Look at, if you have your Bibles open in Genesis 22, look at what God says when he says, get up and go in verse 2, and he tells them this, to the mountain I tell you. And then look at Abraham's reaction in verse 3. What's his reaction?
He did.
Does he do this? No.
No, he gets up and obeys.
So what's the difference? He's shown that he's like pleading for human life here, and when it comes to his own child, he's just like, all right. It's just bizarre, isn't it? This is not Abraham's character, and this seems out of character with God. Okay. Abraham is silent. Remember where Abraham's from? Mesopotamia, yeah. Specifically, you remember? Land of Ur, right? Which comes out of Babylon. Do you know one of the most sadistic practices of the people of Ur is to their pagan gods? Take a wild guess. Child sacrifice. Okay? Okay. Abraham and God have been through a ton of stuff by now. Right? He's faithful to God. He's like, okay, I didn't trust you before. Actually, time and time again, I didn't trust you. And I've learned my lesson. So now I'm going to be faithful. And what's been looming this whole time in the back of Abraham's mind? This child sacrifice is the ultimate dedication you can have to a God. And he's attributing it to Yahweh. Okay? He has this idea of who God is. He's just like the pagan gods, and he's like, okay, let's go do this. I've been waiting for this moment for 20 years. And he says, okay, he gets up his son and actually several other people. He's like, I knew this day was coming. And they have this walk up Mount Moriah. This promised child that they had hoped for so much, that they had longed for. This is his life. This is his whole future. This is all of God's promises, is now carrying the bundle of sticks that he will lay him on and burn them after he's sacrificed it. Could you imagine what's going through Abraham's head as he's headed up there to do this? Hebrews says that, well, he trusted because he knew that he could even bring Isaac back from the dead. It's amazing. Yes?
And he did say God will provide for himself a sacrifice.
Well, Abraham says that to Isaac, right?
So he knows that God can do amazing things.
Okay, we're gonna come back to that actually. Oh, well, we'll talk about that for a second. So Isaac, he's like 20-ish years old, okay? And they get up there, and he goes, the Lord's going to provide a sacrifice. I'm going to go over here and pray. And then he ends up tied up his son and puts him on the altar. What if you're Isaac? If my dad did that to me, I'd be like, okay, let's go, Pappy. Right? Like it's dancing time. Like, I ain't going on that thing, right? And yet there's no struggle from Isaac. No indication that there's anything. He just willingly does it, actually. Kind of bizarre, huh? And by the way, Dad, if you're watching, I could take you. All right. Now. All right. The end of the text, he says, yeah, he considered he was even able to raise them from the dead. And we think of this as just like, how barbaric, God, that you would even ask him to do this thing. Now, it makes a little bit more sense that we understand that maybe some of preconceived ideas that Abraham had of child sacrifice, it being the ultimate test, right? It helps me, anyway, significantly on this. But we think, how barbaric those people were to sacrifice their children. We do this today all the time, by the way. We sacrifice our kids. And I'm not just talking about what we talked about in the announcements, by the way. That's one of the areas, right? Well, we actually do this in a myriad of ways. We do it when we treat success as more important than time with our families and showing them love. We're just sacrificing our children on the altar of success. When we treat beauty and we treat it more important than innocence at such an early age, and we treat sex the way we do. We're sacrificing to Aphrodite. This is no different. We're sacrificing to the same gods in our culture. A very common one is we sacrifice our children either on entertainment, right, or on the current culture of understanding of love, that if I give whatever they want, they'll love me. And their own desire actually rules over the top. Now I don't have kids, so you can throw rocks at me afterwards. But this is just some things that I have seen and things that I've learned from other people. But these are just a couple of examples of how our current culture actually believes in the same thing that the culture of believed in. We sacrifice our children in many ways, okay? It just looks different than the physical act of killing them as did. And yet I hear many encouraging stories, and this is what I love. I hear many encouraging stories of parents that sometimes leave their high-ranking jobs because they realize that the most important thing is the family unit. They do away with technology, whatever it is that is consuming their life, that is preventing them from giving their children the best possible opportunity to grow up in a love relationship with the Lord and with their own parents, and they make that sacrifice to the Lord. They sacrifice the thing that's keeping them from the Lord. And I hear these amazing stories, and I'm like, yeah, let's do that. Right? And it's exciting. That's what faith is. That's what faith towards God is. It's not that we have this bizarre story of him sacrificing to God, but it is sacrificing the things that we think that we like and we think that we want, and sacrificing our preconceived ideas on who he is, so that we can actually truly worship him, and we can actually be free and let him reign in our lives. Faith is allowing God to stop us in the tracks of our cultural misconceptions about what is most important. Here we go. At this last moment, Abraham raises the knife in the air. Yahweh looks just like the other gods. In this moment, he looks like just the other pagan gods who want the child sacrifice as the ultimate thing. And God steps in and he's like, stop. I have another way. You still think this is who I am? This is not like my character. This is not who I am at all. I would never ask you to do this, us, right? But he asks Abraham because he wants to destroy his misconceptions of who God is. He wants to reinvent or reignite Abraham's passion and help him think of actually who he is. I'm nothing like those other gods. I'm not like the gods of our current culture. I'm not like the gods of the culture. I'm something far greater than anything you've ever imagined. I'm something so much better than that. And he says, stop, and he provides a lamb, and they have a sacrifice there. What a moment, right? When you're just like, oh man. I don't know how he could do that, first off, and the fact that he's going through with it, but then hearing the words just stop. Being stopped like that. A revival of life. As Hebrews says, in a way, he received his son back. He was willing to say goodbye, but he received him back in this moment. Pretty amazing. This event is why Abraham is actually called the father of our faith. Not just because he learned how to obey God even when he was unfaithful, but also because he allowed God to bring him through his own misunderstandings of who Yahweh was. That's the relationship, right? That we have with each other, and sometimes we get into a friendship or something, and we have these misconceptions until you get deep into it, and you're like, wow, I had no idea that's who you were. This is what Yahweh does with us. And if you spend long enough with Jesus, and you allow him to do this, and not just say, oh yeah, that's who you are, but really get deep down and let him do this with your life. He will do it. He will take something that you thought was so true about him, and he'll be like, I'm better than that. I'm so much better than that. There's a couple takeaways from this story that I thought made an impact on me. That God is gracious and patient with our unfaithfulness even, and with our misunderstandings of him. But he's also confrontive about it, okay? He doesn't just leave us where we're at. And sometimes he does that in some pretty crazy and disturbing ways, right? Just like what we see today. It's hard. It can be disturbing. But he has a way of bringing us into a clearer picture of who he is when we are willing and open-hearted towards him. And that he provides the sacrifice. Right? Okay. Basically, out of all the main religions, this is the distinguishing factor of Christianity versus all the big religions of the world. All the other big religions of the world said you have to work to get salvation, you have to work to get up to God, you have to climb the mountain of salvation, okay? And in Christianity, we say, actually, God brought it down to us in the form of Jesus. And that's the final example that he gives here. That God would rather provide the sacrifice to us, and he goes at no end. There's no end to the length he will go to show us his love for us and what he will do in order to bring us back to him. There's no length if he was willing to do this. And whatever our views on the story, maybe you don't agree with what I said, but I think it's true. But whatever our views on the story, the question still remains here at the end. Will you trust God even when he seems to be acting out of character? Will you trust him and will you go with him because he's called you to do maybe even something difficult? And maybe even teaching you a lesson through that. We have a song? Okay.
Wonderful peace. Far away in the depths of my spirit tonight rolls a melody sweeter than song. It's celestial like strains it unceasingly falls, o'er my soul like an infinite calm. Peace, peace, wonderful peace, coming down from the Father above. Sweep over my spirit forever, I pray, in fathomless billows of love. Weary soul without gladness or comfort or rest, passing down the rough pathway of time. Make the Savior your friend ere the shadows grow dark, or accept of this peace so sublime. Peace, peace, wonderful peace, coming down from the Father above. Sweep over my spirit forever, I pray, in fathomless billows of love.
Lord, thank you so much for that peace. Lord, even when we don't feel it in the moment, as if Abraham probably didn't feel complete peace except for the fact that he trusted you and that was enough for him. Even when he didn't understand and he couldn't see past it, he still believed that you could even raise Isaac from the dead, that you would still bring about your promise that you've promised to each one of us, Lord. You've made that promise, and I just pray that we have that same type of faith. Lord, even if we have misconceptions or don't understand why we have to do certain things, that we hear your voice, Lord, first. We hear your voice and we follow it, even when we don't understand, especially when we don't understand, Lord. Thank you so much for that peace that reigned when you stopped him from bringing the knife down, Lord. And I just pray that you do the same thing with our lives, that you show us that you have the best intentions. You have everything for us, a life in you, both now and for all of eternity, Lord. Thank you for those promises. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.